And so to summarize this image, again, you want to make sure that you learn the digestive organs in this order, and you want to know how these organs contribute to the breakdown or the assistance in the digestion process. And so that leaves us with two categories of structures, some that are involved in the digestive tract, which is a pathway where food passes along from mouth to anus. And accessory organs are going to be any structures or organs that assist in breaking down or help the digestive tract in general. And so usually they do this by secreting enzymes, by secreting acid, secreting saliva. A lot of times it involves just releasing very, very specific items, or I guess I should say molecules. And now, so when we say digestive system overall, the digestive tract also is considered the GI tract you've heard before. And so another word for it is also the alimentary canal. If anybody has taken Spanish, alimentar, right, means to eat, but really it actually means to nutriate yourself, to become healthy. And that usually implies some sort of a consuming of healthy foods. And so now, the point of the digestive tract, we should know by now, it's to provide nutrients for all cells. You eat proteins so that you can break them apart and make your own cellular parts. And also, you will make more cells with all of these components. And what do I mean by components? I mean proteins, lipids or fats, and carbohydrates. And so all those building blocks will be obtained from those macromolecules, from those nutrients. And when we look at all the systems combined together, this is the cardiovascular system. You're seeing blood vessels. And this is respiratory system. So we know that it delivers or it helps with or introduces oxygen into the bloodstream by placing it onto red blood cells. And those same red blood cells will release CO2 into the lungs where you breathe it out. In that same note, we follow oxygen. And you can see that once oxygen is in your bloodstream, it will find its way to the tissue cells, and they will use that oxygen to make energy and ATP. And as a result, they will produce a gas, CO2, which will eventually be released through that respiratory system. And if we consider now the digestive system, all the nutrients that are traveling through your digestive tract get placed into the blood vessels. Those same blood vessels not only drop off gases, but they also drop off nutrients. And then these cells will produce a waste such as urea, ammonia, bilirubin. And so this will be eliminated from the bloodstream by the urinary system, the kidneys. And so you can see why I start off with this long title here. The digestive system works with other systems. And so you're sort of seeing all the systems really on the final that contribute to the longevity and the happiness of your tissue cells. Now, with that, let's move on. Now, some quick functions of each one. The oral cavity is involved in mechanical processing, which means breakdown, physical breakdown. And so you're going to be using accessory structures such as teeth and tongue. We'll talk about them more later. And the oral cavity will also have the ability to secrete saliva, which also contribute to both mechanical and chemical breakdown. The pharynx is the same exact pharynx we learned about in the respiratory system. It is going to be involved in passaging food into the esophagus when we talk about it in the digestive system. The esophagus, for now, is just a muscular tube that transports things into the stomach. We'll talk about any details we need as we get to it. The stomach is involved in chemical and mechanical breakdown. Chemical because it will release things such as stomach acid, HCl, I'll write for short, stomach acid. That's hydrochloric acid. Which runs at a pH of approximately 2. And so the acid can break down your foods. Mechanical processing because inside of your stomach, your stomach, I'll say, has muscles. It has muscle layers made of smooth muscle. which contribute to the breakdown. It squeezes the stomach in a unique way to mix all that stomach acid and all the contents inside. And so we'll explore that as well. The small intestine is going to do the major amount of absorption. I don't really talk too much about enzymatic activity at this intro class, but there will be a lot of enzymes, and just so I make sure you're prepared for physio, enzymes are protein machines. We're going to put in a quotation, machines. So they carry out activities, and that's what an enzyme is. It's a protein that carries out important cellular activities. So we'll put protein machines that carry out cellular activities in the cell. And the large intestine is just another counterpart of the small intestine in the sense that it has a major responsibility, and it's not listed here, but in the absorption of water plus salts, or electrolytes. Examples would be sodium, potassium, calcium, as examples. And also, it's going to be involved in compacting your feces. And we'll explain why later, but there's a benefit, and it helps with the absorption of water and salts. And so when we talk about dehydration, it means that it can remove water from the feces inside. And so it's just easier to think of it as absorption of water. We'll talk about this concept as we get to it. And so as you approach this material, make sure that you learn the organs in this order first, as you're seeing it in this box. With that in mind, altogether, these specific functions don't necessarily mean that, that this occurs only in the oral cavity, although ingestion does only occur in the oral cavity. But we're going to see that mechanical digestion occurs in the oral cavity, in the stomach. And so these are general activities carried out by the digestive tract. Some are specific, some are not. And so an example of some that are specific is ingestion. You obviously can only take in food through your oral cavity. It's possible maybe even through the nasal cavity, but I wouldn't recommend it. And so ingestion is the process of placing solid food or liquid into the oral cavity. Mechanical digestion involves crushing, mixing, shredding. And so whenever you hear anything that implies some sort of force, like if it's a word you use in the kitchen, right? If you're breaking apart your ingredients to cook it, then you know it's probably mechanical processing, mechanical digestion. And mechanical propulsion is a little bit different. This involves movement through the tract. So through the tract. And this is usually going to involve smooth muscle contractions. Chemical digestion, our main example today is, and really in this class, is going to be the saliva and the stomach acid we just mentioned. I'll write HCl for short. And so there are particular molecules in these compounds, in these larger molecules, that will help with breakdown. This donates hydrogen, so it's considered an acid. And this is highly reactive, so it reacts with your food, breaking it down. And saliva will have proteins, enzymes, that will help break down substances even before they hit your stomach. And we'll talk about that as well as we get there. Secretion, like you just heard me say, the release of acid, the release of saliva, and so saliva will have enzymes. And so saliva will also contain some water in it. We're going to see that our pancreas releases buffers. And so these two, more than likely, saliva's our example, and acids, HCl, in the stomach. Absorption should be pretty straightforward. The intestines are going to be able to place your nutrients across the epithelium and into the bloodstream. And we'll discuss epithelium again if you don't remember, so don't worry. And defecation is going to be the action of releasing your material waste, which we call, or the key term for that is feces. And I'm not sure what got cut off here, so we'll just get rid of this. There we go. With that, let's move on. Now this page, it has two images to describe peristalsis. We've talked about peristalsis in the urinary system, and now also as we talk about smooth muscle contractions, anytime there's smooth muscle contractions and it's happening through a tube, getting from point A to point B, it will involve the use of muscles that are within that tube. And so you'll have usually 2 layers of muscles we'll talk about. But for now, I just want you to focus on the movement of this food. And now, what is this word? Bolus. When anything enters your oral cavity, right? It starts off as a hamburger. Let's just say you eat a hamburger, it goes into your mouth. The second that hamburger goes into your mouth, scientifically, we don't call it a hamburger anymore. We don't even call it food. We call it bolus. So bolus is the vocab word for the food that has entered your oral cavity. And so that's where this word comes from, bolus. So it's when food enters the digestive tract. And so you're thinking to yourself, oral cavity. Now, the best news about a lot of this, and stay on this page, I just want to show you to get ahead of something, and it'll help tie things together, is that we're going to explore the stomach, we're going to explore the small intestine, we're going to explore the large intestine. And when you look at the inside or the layers of each one of those tubes, you're going to see that at the end of the day, they have the same layers: mucosa, submucosa, muscular layer, and serosa. You'll notice, again, mucosa, submucosa, muscular layer, serosa. And you probably figured it out. Here you're going to have your mucosa, you're going to have your submucosa, your muscular layer, and your serosa. So what is all this? And when you look at this muscular layer of each section, it doesn't matter which organ we're talking about, every single organ has a muscular layer. And the best news is that they all carry out peristalsis, which means that they're contracting, they're squeezing. We'll see a cool visual of that in a second. And so we're seeing these layers, and so there will always be 2 layers consistently in every organ. That's my favorite part. You learn it in one, you learn it in all of them. And so the most superficial layer is going to be your longitudinal muscle. And the one that's closest to the lumen, and remember a lumen is a hollow passageway inside of a tube, this is going to be your circular layer, which we're seeing here, the circular muscles. And so with those 2 muscles in mind, first, the circular muscle is when it contracts, that squeezing is going to put some force on the posterior segment of that bolus that's moving through the tract. And it's going to, like when you're squeezing toothpaste, it's going to squeeze continuously down that tract because it's squeezing from the back, posterior to it. And then the longitudinal muscles, they contract in the longitudinal ways, long ways, not in a circular way, but in a long way, this way. And so it's like if you're pressing, so if you're thinking about a toothpaste bottle, you can have a toothpaste bottle and you can get the toothpaste out from this end by squeezing it. Or if you think about it, if you put it on the ground, you can kind of do this. You can kind of go to the end and squeeze it out like this instead. So that's different from squeezing versus kind of pushing down on it so that toothpaste kind of squeezes out. So it's 2 mechanisms or 2 directions of force, 2 directions, but overall this activity is called peristalsis. All right, so the circular muscles will contract behind the bolus, and the longitudinal muscles will contract ahead of the bolus. That becomes the key difference between the two. Behind and one ahead. And so if you learn this, circular and longitudinal, you've learned every organ's muscle layers. Every organ has those two layers. A deep circular muscle and a superficial longitudinal muscle. And we'll have one last thing to add regarding that when we get there. Oh, we can even get these highlights here. I thought they were just on the figure. Paying attention to this. Okay, which one's behind, which one's ahead? You should know that. Now, in this process, you kind of eat a consistent meal, and it's not evenly going to be, your whole entire meal isn't going to fit as just one bolus. So it's going to enter in segments, right? You're maybe watching TV or on your phone while you're eating. So, some of the food you ate first is traveling ahead of the remaining food. And so what is the point of this image? Now, our bolus has this ability to segment. And this means that it's going to fragment the bolus. And this, as a result, will mix it. And so if we look at our photos and we kind of simplify what's going on, you can see that this chunk of bolus is A, this bolus B here. That's how it starts off. And as the smooth muscles are contracting, both the circular and the longitudinal, they're going to split it. So what you end up with is like an A1 and A2, B1 and B2, because this one now split into two different segments. This one split into two segments, and it just continues on in that manner. If you wanted to keep this example going, you can even say now A is 4 parts, A2, A3, A4, and this may not be true to the figure, but overall, this is what's going on. And so the segmentation allows for mixing, breakdown of all the enzymes or anything that's been secreted inside the tube to help with breakdown. It helps with segmenting. And so at the end of the day, you end up with really mixed boluses. So this can end up being A3 or something. This can be B1 and B2 maybe, A1. And so they all mix together eventually. So we don't call this mixing really, we call it segmentation because we're seeing fragmentation, breakdown, splitting. And so this is a byproduct or a result in segmentation. So peristalsis results in segmentation. And that's all I need you to understand. That's the key words here. Segmentation, peristalsis, bolus, and no, circular and longitudinal. What's the difference? And that's it for this page. With that oral cavity, this is a lot of structures from lab, so all it is really just being able to ID. So let's ID. Labia means lips, just like in reproductive. So we have major lip, superior lip, the minor lip, but just labia is okay for our test as lip. Cheek is going to be your buccal region, your cheek. It's made by your buccinator muscle. That's it, be able to label that. You have your tongue, just know it as tongue, easy. In the posterior segment, you're going to have some tonsils. And so this is our lingual tonsil, our palatine tonsil, and these tonsils are lymphatic tissues. And what it does is that it contains white blood cells, lymphocytes specifically, and these white blood cells are involved in immunity. They're your first line of defense as you consume foods. And so in the lab and lecture, if you see the one attached to the tongue, or this tonsil attached to the tongue, that's your lingual tonsil. And if it's close to your soft palate and your hard palate, that's your palatine tonsil. With that, we have our hard palate made of bone. You can feel it with your tongue. It's super, super tough. And then all of a sudden, you'll feel this very soft layer of that palate. That soft layer is called your soft palate. The whole thing is soft palate. Just the little hanging bell is your uvula. Your uvula. And the role of the uvula, this was probably the only one that has a function to it, is that it prevents food from entering the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity. And entering might have 2 R's or something. I feel like my head's ringing right here. It feels like something's wrong. But I'm not sure, sorry. I'm just going to underline it. I don't remember. And so food prevents food from entering the nasal cavity. And that's the role of the uvula. And as a reminder for respiratory, you have your epiglottis. So think about it when you look at this figure. This one prevents passageway of food into the nasal cavity. And you have your epiglottis, which prevents the passage of food into your larynx. So you have a flap for the airway, a flap for the nasal cavity to make sure food from your pharynx, your throat, will go straight to the esophagus. Other than that, your tongue, I know that it has regions to it, but just know it as your tongue. With that, be able to label this figure with your bolded terms. You don't need to worry about root of tongue, just learn tongue. Body of tongue, don't worry about it, just tongue. And from there, we move on. If you want descriptive functions for them, you can find it there. But otherwise, just be able to label, if I'm being honest. If you analyze a tooth, know the simple anatomy of a tooth. The exposed portion is the crown. The portion that digs through the gum is your neck. And the portion of your tooth that's embedded and forms the Gomphoces ligaments, or I would say the Gomphoces joint, I should say. This joint is where the root is. Okay, so the part that's not exposed, not part of the gums. And the inside of your tooth is your pulp cavity. And this exam is big enough, so we'll leave it at that. Now, if we look at accessory structures, these are going to assist the oral cavity. And so you have glands, one that's close to your ear called the parotid. This is coming from, in Latin, par usually means next to something, like adjacent to it. Otid is coming from the word otic, which means ear. So it's like saying next to the ear gland. And this gland will have a little duct that will release saliva into your mouth, into your oral cavity when you are eating. And so if we look at our parotid salivary gland, it's going to release saliva and it's located next to the ear. All right, so we're trying to identify, and we remember it's one of the salivary glands. The duct, the little pathway that's connected to it is the parotid duct. That's what connects it to the oral cavity. Your submandibular gland is there underneath the mandible, hence the name submandibular, and it will have a submandibular duct, which is just a passageway for saliva to also enter the oral cavity. And one thing that it secretes that's unique is that it secretes a buffer. What's a buffer? It prevents pH changes. To think of it even more simpler, prevents acidity from increasing. That's a simple oversimplification, but it is an easy way of seeing it. It also releases mucus, a much more thicker than water. So the saliva is more mucousy. And the real highlight is this enzyme. I want you to leave this class knowing this is where physio kind of picks up in the labs. And so amylase is a protein, an enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. That's why even in your oral cavity, you are already doing chemical digestion. It breaks down breads, carbs, anything that's made out of carbs and plant products. That's why if you put a piece of bread in your mouth without chewing it, you'll see that slowly it'll just dissolve like cotton candy. And it's because you have these unique proteins in that saliva. And because it's in your saliva, it's called salivary amylase. If it's found in your stomach, it's probably called gastric amylase. But this amylase is in your saliva. And so that's what makes the submandibular salivary glands unique. And simply for sublingual, it's underneath the tongue. And it produces more saliva. That's all we're going to know. I only need you to know that submandibular happens to have salivary amylase. All right, because the other saliva has buffers. It has mucus too, but I really want this highlight, you to leave with this highlight. So salivary amylase is released by the submandibular gland. You should know these three, though, as the salivary glands. Keep it simple. Very, very simple here. Now, exploring the teeth. Baby teeth, milk teeth are all referred to as deciduous teeth. You don't have to know the gross anatomy of deciduous teeth. You just have to know that that's the term for baby teeth, milk teeth. And when you lose those teeth, you develop your adult teeth, which we are going to refer to as our permanent teeth. And if you look at the table above, you will see that there are different types of teeth. Incisors are meant to cut like scissors. And so incisors are blade-like, and they're useful for clipping and cutting just like scissors. Canines, you want to think about like, dogs have large, prominent canines. And so those are for tearing and slashing. Usually any animal that consumes the flesh of other organisms will usually have canines. With this thought in mind, animals that primarily consume plant products have molars. Humans, because we have a mixed diet, we also have molars and canines. So molars, if you look at their shape, they're meant for crushing. Premolars are kind of this perfect hybrid of molars and canines because they'll have a sharp edges, but they'll also be wider and they'll be able to crush as well. So they're a good hybrid of molars and canines. And so for premolars, for simplicity's sake though, molars and premolars are going to be involved in crushing and grinding. Keep it simple. And those are your types of teeth. You do not have to know the actual gross anatomy of adult teeth. And the only thing I want to add here is that wisdom teeth, these teeth are, this diagram has them placed here, but in our society we remove them. And the reason that we remove them is because they're backup teeth. You ever wondered why humans are born with these? It's because humans really would destroy their teeth consuming nuts, consuming bones for the bone marrow. So they'll destroy their molars and they'll have a backup set to come and replace it in their adulthood. And you'll notice that the age that they come out in is 17 to 21 years old. And that's because humans back in, wild times before pre-culture, pre-tribe, we're still walking around, we're still hunting and gathering. These teeth were much more useful, and then humans only lived to about 30 years old, so they came at pretty much the right time. You probably destroyed the first set of molars you had leading into your adult life, the final stretch of your adult life. And then you probably live until 30 because of diseases, predators, etc. And in our society, we remove them usually around that age because we really don't need them. And so these wisdom teeth are referred to as vestigial structures. And what the vestigial means, it means kind of like obsolete in a way. Oh, wow. Obsolete. Oh, that's right. Obsolete. Obsolete. Obsolete structures. And so this means that we no longer really need it. We don't really use it anymore. And so, last bit of gross anatomy we need. This is the uvula that we saw on the other slide. I just wanted to offer a different perspective. We're seeing our tongue, obviously. We're seeing our soft palate back there, where the uvula is going to be connected to it. Uvula will connect to that soft palate. Actually, this one, oh yeah, that's fine. And that's it. I'm only going to talk about a term, just for the sake of your own learning. There's this little piece of connective tissue here called the frenulum. I'm making this cutoff, but I just want you to know it exists. So I'll just say frenulum is this tiny little bit of connective tissue that connects the lip to the gum. There's another one below, the inferior frenulum, and this one connects the lip to the gum as well. And the only last word to steal from this slide is gingiva. Gingiva is the same word as gum. You probably knew that because you've heard of gingivitis, which is an infection in your gums. And with that, I just put this in here because it was a pretty cool slide. Everything that you need is really on this perspective because it matches the lab really well. Okay, so that's why I'm really focusing on this one instead. And now we've made it to the esophagus because food has left the oral cavity. We're traveling down the esophagus, and this is the visual you need to start adapting for the rest of the organs. All of these organs that follow, esophagus, small intestine, large intestine, they are tube-like. And so the passageway isn't as clear as you'd think. You'd think that it'd be a perfect little tunnel, a perfect little circle in the center, but you're seeing that it's sort of star or, tentacle shaped. And as food passages, it expands. And then it closes like this all over again. And so the inside of that esophagus is this space that you're seeing. And so there's an inner lining. We zoom in on that inner lining on this little box, and we see this. And we see that the inside of it is made of stratified squamous, non-keratinized, because this is a good cell for friction, right? We eat every day, so these cells will go down with your food, and you will replace these cells every single day and create a brand new inner lining inside of the esophagus. And so that's the benefit of having stratified squamous in that segment. And so our esophagus' main role is that it actively moves food from the oral cavity to the stomach. And remember, instead of food, we don't say food, we say bolus. So this is an error in your publisher. This should say bolus. And it is made out of stratified squamous. All right, the mucosa, which means the first inner layer, is made of stratified squamous. And so if we use this image to understand the word mucosa, mucosa just means the layer of epithelium. And the only reason that we don't call it epithelium anymore is because now we are always aware that there is a layer of mucus. So it doesn't just care about the cells, it also cares about the mucus. That's why we're not saying epithelial layer like we used to. We're saying mucosa. And logically, the layer underneath would be submucosa, but we can't really see it. And I really don't want you to think about it too much here. We'll see it on the next slide. And you don't need any of this. This is just there as just to have it. Now, we're here at the esophagus, and before we go into each organ, mesenteries and mucosa, submucosa, and I'm just realizing this subheading got onto the wrong page. I need you to all do me a favor, and I need you to delete this. And the topic is just mesentery. It was probably for the next one. Don't know what happened or how it happened. Guess I didn't notice. Now, mesentery is going to be a connective tissue. And so as you look at this weird figure, what this is that it's showing your organs. I'll highlight in purple, starting at the stomach. I can leave that one out. Small intestine, large intestine. And so these mesenteries, which I'm highlighting in yellow, their job is to route blood vessels and nerves to all of these organs. And so remember that in your lab, we've covered that this long curvature is called the greater curvature. This is called the lesser curvature. So this connective tissue that connects to the lesser curvature is called lesser omentum. The greater omentum connects to the greater curvature of the stomach. And the small intestine, the mesentery that connects to it is called mesentery proper. And the mesentery that connects to the colon, which is your large intestine, and as a quick tip, anything referred to as colon means large intestine. And so the large intestine or colon are essentially the same word. And so mesocolon is mesentery of the colon. And so what is it? If we zoom in on any of the mesenteries, it'll just be pretty much organized layers that store fat, that provide a route for blood vessels to serve the structures. And so this is an example of our greater curvature. And so all of this is your greater omentum. All of this is your lesser omentum because it connects to your lesser curvature. And it also connects to the liver. So seeing what it is, they kind of all look like this. They just have a different name depending on what they're attached to. And so mesentery, our take-homes, is that it's going to be areolar tissue, and its job is to provide an access route for blood vessels, nerves. We'll leave it at that. As you can see, they attach to the organs, so they organize it, they stabilize it, they keep them attached. And when your smooth muscles are contracting, we've been seeing in the models that the large intestine tends to be a twisted up tube like this, like we saw in the beginning. Went too far back here. Like this twisted up tubes. And so to prevent them from twisting and becoming entangled and becoming clogged like a hose that's being twisted up, they are organized. So this lateral view of the mesenteries, I'll highlight in yellow again. We have mesocolon, greater omentum, mesentery proper, mesocolon, and lesser omentum. These mesenteries organize all of the intestines, and we're seeing that organization as we look at it there. The secondary thing that they are, you kind of already know what they are. When you see this word peritoneal, peritoneum, do you remember your word pericardial cavity, pleural cavity? Those were the sacs that surround the heart or the lungs, and they lubricate it with serous fluid. So what do we see here? We see chambers, and what's in here? Serous fluid. Serous fluid. So it cushions all of your digestive tract. It helps maintain and lubricate all of these organs on their day-to-day activity. And you already know higher level concepts that I'm not really going to mention, but you know it. What's the outer wall called on all of these serous membranes? Parietal. And what's the one found attached to the organ? Visceral. So this is the visceral peritoneum. This is the parietal peritoneum. All right, so that sums up all of your mesenteries. Whatever they're attached to determines their name, and that's what this is here to help you with. Know it simply, and you'll be fine. The last thing that you might see one day is you'll have some professors or some classes, they'll call these the dorsal mesenteries. Dorsal mesenteries. And this will be the ventral mesenteries because they're in the front. But I'm not going to worry about that. And I put that note here for you. So the dorsal mesenteries are the... Oh man, these got cut off continued. I just realized what happened. So don't worry about which ones are in front dorsal. My notes can't cover it efficiently here. They're cut off. Dang it. And so just cross this off and just be aware of these mesenteries. And next semester I'll make that adjustment. There we go. Just know they exist and what they attach to. And in the lab exam, if you see one of these little web-like structures connected to the colon, it's called mesocolon. Now, as we move on to the next concept now, the best news is you're learning the same 4 concepts right now for the next 4 slides. Every single organ that follows, the stomach, small intestine, and the large intestine, I blow this picture up for you on the next page with where it matters. And so right here, I just want you to see how they have a lot of commonality. They have the mucosa, submucosa, muscular layer, and serosa. And so what makes each one different is pretty much going to be small differences within these 4 layers. So if we talk about all the layers together, the mucosa layer will always mean the mucus that's on top of the epithelial cells. It's not just the epithelium, but also the mucus. So that mucus will be secreted by glands, and those glands may secrete other things, not only mucus, but also enzymes. We'll even add there possibly stomach acid or HCl again. And keep it light. That's all I need you to know as a simple definition for mucosa. Submucosa is going to be the layer underneath, and before you always learned there was epithelial tissue and then basement membrane and connective tissue. Nothing has changed. You're just not going to refer to it too much as connective tissue anymore. You're really going to summarize it as submucosa. And so you'll see that you'll usually find connective tissue below. Usually irregular. Because if you remember irregular in this case, it's the one that can expand, stretch, and go back. So as food is going through these tubes, they expand and then go back. And so we have to thank our submucosa for giving them that flexibility. You also, if you remember, your skin has irregular underneath. So that's the reason that I can pull my skin, let it go, and then it goes back to normal. That's exactly what's going on in all of these submucosas. All of them. They all allow the stretching and then the return of the shape of that organ. And they will also contain glands. You can even see it in the photos, in some of them, I guess. We'll see them in the more advanced ones for each particular topic, but that's where the glands exist. And so glands in these areas will secrete different things depending on where we're at. Let's worry about it when we get to each organ. The muscle layer, you already know everything you need to know. Peristalsis, 2 layers, the circular layer, and the longitudinal layer. This results in mechanical processing and movement along the tract. The serosa, all you got to know about it is that it's going to serve or be the visceral peritoneum. It's going to be the visceral peritoneum, this layer. And what does this do for us? It connects it to everything else. So that's what visceral peritoneum, the meaning behind this statement, that it's going to be the visceral peritoneum, and so the serosa is just the visceral peritoneum. And there is no serosa in your oral cavity, the pharynx, or the esophagus and rectum. We call the outer layer of these structures instead, we call it adventitia. That's the only difference. How can you as a student remember this? These structures are not found in the abdominal cavity. That's the real key difference. If it's not in the abdominal cavity, adventitia. If it's in the abdominal cavity, serosa. No. Yeah, that's right. In the abdominal cavity. And then these are not in abdominal cavity. Oops, dang. And so these next slides, we'll talk about each of these organs and we'll break apart what makes these layers unique. And I really want you to summarize things, okay? Serosa is going to be the same for all of them. Muscular layer is going to be the same for all of them. The only unique things that are going on happen in the mucosa, submucosa. So it's going to seem like you have to learn a lot, but you're really addressing only 2 layers. So let's get started. So our stomach, everything from lab, quickly, greater curvature, lesser curvature, the cardia is the region that connects the esophagus to the rest of the stomach. The body is the major mass of the region. I'll highlight it in this color so it's not so ambiguous. Whoops, a different color. All of this would be the body that I highlight in purple, both the inside and the outside. All right, both the outside and the inside. The pyloric region, the pyloric part, that's this one in yellow right now. It's the final region of the stomach, just as we saw in lab. I don't need you to know any of these other terms. The only one that matters to me now is just the region name and the pyloric sphincter. This is a muscle that regulates muscle regulating stomach acid plus contents regulating movement of stomach acid plus contents. It's a muscle, in other words. And it's called pyloric sphincter because it's in the pylorus. With that, I told you there are only a few differences. Here's our first one. The muscular layer, it actually has 3 in the stomach. It's the only organ with 3 layers. Let me get rid of this. So 3 longitudinal, still superficial, then deeper to it is circular, and finally the stomach has one more unique layer called the oblique layer. And these smooth muscles contract in different directions. And so that creates all this unique mixing with the stomach acid. And finally, ruga are the wrinkles inside of the stomach. And what is ruga, right? Because ruga now, we're going to go into the mucosa layer, the first layer. And so we zoom in on that mucosa layer, and this is why it looks wrinkly. It's pretty much made of epithelial cells. You can see little columnar cells. You can see their basement membrane. You can see the connective tissue underneath. You can see the capillaries. So what's going on in the stomach is that these cells are secreting stomach acid, they're secreting enzymes, and then all of that stomach acid and those enzymes will go into the stomach And so these little pits are called gastric pits. And so if we zoom in on a gastric pit, we see that the gastric pits lead into gastric glands. And so that's what the ruga are, gastric pits and gastric glands. And I don't need you to know the specific cells here. I just need you to know the secretions we're going to see is hydrochloric acid or stomach acid. And one new one to add, because it'll be useful for physiology, pepsinogen. And this breaks proteins. Breaks down proteins. Don't forget about your greater omentum and lesser omentum that are found on the stomach. With that, don't forget this one unique layer. Now, that's the differences on most things. Last thing to add on the mucosa, one unique thing about the stomach is that it secretes an alkaline mucus, which means it protects you from low pH or acidity. And that's absolutely it for the stomach. Now, if we follow where the stomach's going to lead its contents, it's going to lead it into the duodenum. This is the beginning of the small intestine. So let's move on to the small intestine. When we look inside of the small intestine, I don't like showing just one image because this is a generic image of the small intestine. You should know by now from our lab that there are 3 parts. The names might be tricky. The names were duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. And so what this cool image is showing is that it's showing what the small intestine looks like first in the duodenum, and then what it looks like in the jejunum, and then what it looks like in the last stretch of it, the ileum. And so you have to envision that this is what it looks like in the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. But if you zoom in, some different stuff is going on. So simply, you can see that all of them really have circular folds. And what this allows, it helps for more complete digestion and breakdown, because these little pits or these little grooves will receive food or bolus, and that bolus will rub up against all those little cells, and then it'll maximize the absorption. And so it's kind of like it's really wrapping around your bolus. And then the one thing I got to add here before we move on at all is when the small intestine receives contents from the stomach, it receives what we call chyme. What does that mean? It means that we no longer call it bolus, the content, the food. When bolus mixes with stomach acid, we call it chyme. All right, so the second that the contents go into your small intestine, the word bolus doesn't exist anymore. It's chyme now, but it's essentially the same thing. And the reason that it has to be called this is because you're going to see that the duodenum, the main responsibility of the duodenum is to work with the liver and the pancreas, and we'll see that on the next page. Okay, so but for now, you need to know that it's the mixing bowl, and the word is chyme for all the contents in the duodenum. And the main function of that duodenum is to neutralize the acidic chyme coming from the stomach. The jejunum is where the majority of your breakdown, of chemical breakdown, meaning enzymatic breakdown, or I'll just write breakdown with enzymes. With enzymes. and it's where the majority of the absorption into your blood vessels occur. At the ileum, most of the food that's already in the ileum will already sort of look like feces. And so, if you can remember this fact, then you can remember something important. What makes this layer unique is that it has lymph nodes. And anything that when you hear lymph, it's involved in immunity. And so because it's so close to the large intestine, you need this submucosa layer to have lymph nodes in order to protect you from the bacteria that love feces in your large intestine. And so that's the ileum. And if you look at the overall progression of the small intestine, the duodenum is the smallest, duodenum is second, and the ileum is the end of the intestines, and it will connect to the large intestine. All right. And the muscle that prevents the passageway or regulates the passageway into the large intestine is called the ileocecal valve. And that's going to be shown on our next page when we get there. And that's going to be found, look at large intestine. Now, as we move on to the next page, this is now accessory organs for the small intestines. So, what we have to do first, we have to realize that the duodenum is going to be working with the pancreas and the liver. So this page is dedicated simply to what these structures are for. If we start with our liver, structures that we should know, same ones as lab. We have our left lobe, right lobe. We have, if we flip it over to the other side, we have our bile duct. Your lab will have it as common bile duct. You can remember either one. You also have lobes, caudate lobe, quadrate lobe. Again, you have these lobes to worry about. And don't forget your little gallbladder. Now, what they do in the role of digestion. So the liver produces bile. That's its main job. And what does bile do? Break down fats. The liver will also receive all your nutrients and produce blood proteins. You're thinking ones like albumin. And I'll leave it at that. One good example, albumin. And that's all I kind of need you to care about. The gallbladder stores bile that the liver creates and then can concentrate it. So the gallbladder's role in digestion is to store and concentrate bile. And so we'll just write stores bile for the liver. And the bile duct, if we look at now the complete picture, bile will go through this duct and be released into the duodenum and help break down fats inside of our mixing bowl, the duodenum. And so that is our bile duct. Next, our little pancreas here, it's also going to be releasing substances through a structure called the pancreatic duct. This pancreatic duct, labeled nowhere for some reason, I don't see it, but the pancreatic duct is going to be this passageway. And it releases pancreatic juice. It really is called that. And pancreatic juice helps neutralize the acidity of the stomach. So we'll write neutralizes. And it also releases digestive enzymes to help with more breakdown. And so bile is placed in the duodenum, pancreatic juice is placed in the duodenum, and then it all mixes up with the stomach acid and the bolus, and that's what we call chyme. Everything that's in here, bile, pancreatic juice, stomach acid, the bolus, all of that is chyme. Chyme. And so this little regulator here, the hepatoliver, pancreatic, pancreas, sphincter, this muscle regulates what the pancreas releases and what the liver releases, and that's why it's called the hepatopancreatic sphincter. One day you might hear it called the ampulla as well, but I just hold on to the muscle name, hepatopancreatic sphincter. From there, we move on. Almost done. Large intestine, the cecum, and also, before we move on, the ileum. This is the last segment of the small intestine. Your chyme has now pretty much essentially turned into feces, okay, once it's in the large intestine. So the cecum is the beginning of the large intestine, this pouch here. You can even see there's a muscle that regulates what goes into the cecum from the ileum. So ileo means the ileum, cecal means the cecum, and so it's called after those two structures, ileocecal valve. And like the valve of a water valve preventing or letting water through it, this is what it allows. It allows substances from the ileum into the cecum. And so the cecum will begin the process of something we call compaction. And what compression and compaction of feces is imagine that we have all this trash, and what do I do if I run out of space in the trash can? I compact it. I smash it and make it smaller. And so that's what your cecum and your large intestine do for you. They collapse it. They compress it, we say. Compress. And colon now, this is a key word that implies anything large intestine. And if you hear the word colic, colic is the same word. It just is like an adjective of it. So when someone says a colic turn or it's a colic symptom, it means it's something to do with the large intestine. And so let that also remind you of why it's called mesocolon, right? The mesentery that's attached to the colon means the mesentery attached to the large intestine. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, I mean this. This mesocolon, this will attach to the large intestine. That's why it's called mesocolon. And the mesentery proper connects to the small intestine. And so simply, gross anatomy, ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, and then finally the exit is anus. We'll see that one on the next slide. But otherwise, make sure you recognize that order. You can put them in that order for a multiple choice test. The ones that you're seeing here. Last thing to add, flexures. Remember flexing? A flexion of the arm meant bend. So a flexure is a bend. And so when you look at the flexures on the large intestine, the right colic flexure, which means colon, bend, and it bends here at the right. This one is called the left colic flexure. And those are the only two I need you to worry about. Right and left, and we'll write it here so it's easier to find. Left plus right colic flexures. And so the large intestine is capable of mass movements through strong smooth muscle contractions or peristalsis. And the reason that movement in the large intestine occurs is that it responds to stretching. That's what distension means. of the stomach. In other words, your stomach alarms your large intestine and says, hey, I got new food coming in. You better get rid of some of that feces in there. And so that's what response of stomach and duodenum mean. Mass movement is capable because of this communication. And one unique thing to add, but I'm not going to test you on it. The large intestine has a lot of goblet cells which secrete a lot of mucus. And so there's a lot of mucus in the large intestine, not really so much microvilli. All right, so you'll see a lot of goblet cells, lots of mucus, and that's what helps sort of really condense that feces. And so one thing that we see versus small intestines is that small intestines had all those little folds, these folds. These folds are referred to as villi overall. So all of them are called circular folds, but just one of them is called a villi. And so we don't have villi in the large intestine. You'll notice it's pretty flat. And so it lacks villi. And here we'll put C, small intestine, because that's where you find villi. And so, and I will add it, dominated by goblet cells. And we'll leave it at that. Dominated by goblet cells. That's easy because it's a picture. You see goblet cells, goblet cells. Secretes mucus, goblet cells. And then we made our way through our digestive tract because we finally made it to the end. This is the rectum. The rectum, I'm not going to let you or ask any structures in it. Just know that it exists and it leads to the anus. And so what we see in the rectum, however, are controls, meaning more muscles. The internal anal sphincter versus the external anal sphincter. If you look at your photos, one's more internal, one's more external. But the real difference is the internal anal sphincter, you don't control it. It is smooth muscle. The external anal sphincter, you do control it. It's skeletal muscle. So that one's under voluntary control. And this one is not under voluntary control. And anus is considered the exit of the rectum. And a little cool fact. This is something in physio you might experience, but I wanted to show you something. That did you know in your large intestine, once you tell students, oh, it stores feces, you kind of forget its role in digestion. But remember that it's an intestine. So yes, feces does enter the beginning of the large intestine, and then you will eventually release it. But what I want you to notice is, look at the volume that goes in. 1,500 milliliters of material of what is supposed to be feces goes into your large intestine. And then by the time what you poop out, right, when you go to number 2, you have only a release of 200 milliliters a day released. So that means that, think about it in cash. If you put $1,500 into a business and it spits out $200 in cash, you've lost, you're only getting a small bit of that initial investment. And so a lot's going in and only a little is coming out. All right, so 200, 1,500 is going in, but you only see 200 being released. So you don't need this. This is just here to show you when you get to physio what to expect. So don't worry about it. But you can see that you absorb vitamins from here. You need your bacteria to break things down in this space for you to release essential vitamins. So it's not just water, not just electrolytes, it's also vitamins or vitamins. But that's for physio, you don't need this, okay? It's just for physio. And then our last page, we talk a little bit about our muscle layer one last time. You know what they are, inner and outer. What's the exception? What's the one place that we see one more muscle? Except which organ? The stomach. And in the stomach, we have one more. We have the oblique layer. That's really the only thing to add for all of the muscular layers. With that,